As the first hint of green begins to peek through the barren ground, as that little sprig grows into a healthy stem, as that stem grows into a stalk and forms a bud, as another bud slowly opens with each new day.
Let us be like that first hint of green, renewed by the warmth of the sun's rays, and ready to emerge with a new energy, ready to face the day. We light this chalice to bring a glimmer of that warmth into our space.
Our opening words today are titled Nourished by J. Wolin. When I look up into the night sky, I am in awe of all that is. There is a faraway galaxy. A star has died, yet it is still bright for my eyes to see and make a wish upon. When I walk into the ocean, I feel the waves rush around my feet, and I feel a certain peace with the world. I peer out into the endless horizon, knowing they came from a place beyond where I can see. When I sit around the fire, I feel its warmth enter me without ever touching me, and I feel safe from the unknown wherever I am. I take in a breath, and I know I am in the present moment. All these wonders that move us and make us feel alive, and make us dream, and make us wonder. Let us protect them so that my children, our children, everyone's children, my grandchildren, our grandchildren, everyone's grandchildren, for generations upon generations, will also have the chance to look beyond the horizon and marvel at the wonder of its existence and continue to be nourished by our home, the earth. Our opening song today is Water is Life. We love it when our fellowship people sing this song, and Carolyn does a solo. It is just one of our best. It comes from Standing Rock for the protection of water. Water is life.
All my relations gone, every nation gone, all my relations under the sun. We are one. We are praying, come. We are praying, come. We are the song and we are the drum. We are one. We are the river, come. We are the river, come. We are the boat, the paddle, the shore. We are one. Many would show me sing Takuyeoyas. Many would show me sing Takuyeoyas. Many would show me walk Takuye. Oyas. We are the water, sing Takuyeoyas. We are the water, sing Takuyeoyas. We are the water, we Takuye. We're all Takuye. We are the ancient one. We are the ancient one. In your breath and bones we sing on. We are one. We are the meadow come. We are the meadow come. We are the lark that sings a new day has begun. We are the new day, run, run, run. We are the new day, run, run, run. We are the old and we are the young. We are one. Nini Wachomi sing Takuya, Nini Wachomi sing Takuya, Nini Wachomi walk Takuya, Takuya, sing. We are the water, sing Takuya, we are the water, sing Takuya, we are the water, we are all sing. We are the earth and sky, we are the thunder cry, we are the fire, we are the light in your eyes. We are standing strong, like a rock, like a stone, on the sacred ground we belong. We are home. All my relations come, every nation come. All my relations under the sun, we are one. All my relations come, every nation come. All my relations under the sun, we are one. All my relations come.
Okay, I'll pause the recording now.
And she is a member of our GLOBE committee, which is our environmental committee at our UU Fellowship. And our reading is Beatitudes for Earth Sunday.
Morning, everybody. The GLOBE committee, the GLOBE stands for Global Learning and Observations to Benefit the Environment. Blessed are the heavens, for they declare the power of creation. Blessed is the earth, our beloved home, for she is a planet of plenitude. Blessed are the waters thereon, for they gave rise to living things. Blessed is the land, for it is the source of life abundant. Blessed is the air we breathe, for it fires us to life and love. Blessed are the beasts of the field, for they are glorious to behold. Blessed are the birds of the air, for they carve a graceful arc in the sky. Blessed are the mountains and the seas and the valleys, for their variety makes rich our habitat. Blessed are the fields of grain, the orchards of fruit, for they give us sustenance, asking nothing in return. Blessed are the dwellers on earth, for they cherish the privilege of living upon it. Blessed are they who protect the earth and all her creatures, from the plants of the field to the trees of the forest, for their reward shall be harmony with the web of existence. Rejoice and be glad, for the earth and her people are one.
Thank you, Shelley. And now we welcome Jim Knicklebine. Jim, going out to Woodland Dunes has been part of that strand of my web. As a teacher, I would take my third graders there, and I still remember one of the volunteers saying, you can always remember the dogwood because of its red bark. And for some reason, it stuck with me, and they had a lot to offer us, and you are a wonderful director, and I think that Woodland Dunes is our county treasure. So I welcome Jim Knicklebine.
Thank you, Mary Jo. I don't know if I can really do a presentation justice after listening to your opening remarks. I'm just another kid that grew up in the country just west of Manitowoc, and my siblings and friends and I just spent all our time outdoors. And that's what we did for entertainment. But somewhere along the way, we picked up an appreciation for what's going on out there. And I'd just like to share a few things relating to Earth Day and what we can do to maybe bring the Earth a little closer to our own lives. So I'll see if I can manage some technology here. There we go. Okay, I hope that worked.
It's good.
Great. Okay. Bringing Earth Day home. Oh, it doesn't want to advance. How about that? You like this slide? We could stay here all day, I think.
Hit escape and take it out of, oh, there we go.
Now we're working. Okay, Earth Day. Earth Day was inspired by this photograph by the Apollo astronauts looking back at the Earth and realizing how finite it is and how limited resources are. This is the old Earth Day flag, and that served to inspire someone named John McConnell, who actually, as a young man, started out working in the plastics industry, but soon realized that he was uncomfortable with the impact of that business on the Earth, the amount of waste that was generated, and the kind of processes that took place. But he was an activist both in support of the environment and peace. And he had a vision in the 1960s to commemorate a day where we honored the Earth and promoted peace among people. And then we also have, as Mary Jo had mentioned, our own Gaylord Nelson, who picked up on that, and when he became a senator, tasked his staff in going out and talking to college kids and finding out if there was a way to organize a day where they could kind of emulate the teach-ins that were going on regarding the Vietnam War at that time. His staff went out, they figured out that most college students were on campus on Wednesdays. So, and they thought that late spring would be a good time to do that. So they proposed April 22nd of 1970 as the first Earth Day for those reasons. Also turned out to be the birthday of Lenin, which was not too popular among some of Senator Nelson's constituents, but it was also the birthday of St. Francis of Assisi, so that kind of balanced out anyway. But they gathered a lot of students together for discussions on that first Earth Day. And here we are 50 years later. It's hard to believe when I was working at a county health department in the environmental health division way back when. I remember having an open house for the 10th Earth Day, and we invited school kids in to show them what we did. And of course, I also always have to throw in a quote from Aldo Leopold, as I just think that his writing and his philosophy are a treasure. And it was his thought that as a yardstick to what we do when we're evaluating whether something is good or not, that a thing is right, but it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. And it's wrong when it tends otherwise. And I think that's just as true today, even though he was way before the first Earth Day. So people have changed the landscape a lot on the surface of the Earth. About 85% of the Earth's surface has been altered in some way by us. About 40% is in agriculture, about 3% is urban, which always surprises me. I think of a higher percentage than that. But we have a big impact on the other living things on the Earth. Some of them can adapt to live with us, and for others, it's very difficult for them to do that. So I'm going to stop it right here just for a moment for discussion. Let me try this. What do you think that we can do to bring Earth Day home and incorporate it more into our lives? Any thoughts?
If you have thoughts, press your space bar or unmute yourself.
I think that something just trivial that I try to do is if I'm walking, I'll usually take a garbage bag with me and just pick up trash. I was picking up trash on the Maritime path one time, and I got so many honks and waves. So it's just some little things like that can make a big difference.
Yep. And I don't think that's trivial, even though maybe those kind of things, garbage along the trail doesn't necessarily impact the trail or ecosystem environmentally. It's still very symbolic of what we're doing and how we think of the environment.
I think taking cloth shopping bags if you happen to go out shopping, grocery shopping, rather than use their plastic bags or paper bags. Have your own shopping bags would help.
Yep. I just read something recently, and essentially the comment, everything boiled down to don't waste. Just don't waste things, no matter what you're doing. That's a really good example of that, rather than plastic that we discard.
As I'm planning for spring, I'm thinking about what more can I plant in the garden that might be friendly to maybe the butterflies or the birds.
Excellent. Yep. And that's going to be the emphasis for most of the rest of what I'm going to talk about.
Yesterday, several of us were at a Zoom meeting for the Midwest UUA, and they were talking about using this time as an opportunity to create equality. And certainly the environment is improving with less driving and less traffic in the air. And to be able to continue that model at some way, they put that in the context of it now we want to put emphasis on the beloved community and the earth as that beloved energy out there for us.
Very nice.
And another thought too, in regards to planting, plant evergreen trees in the north areas where these trees don't lose their leaves in the winter and help promote creating oxygen year round.
Yes, exactly. Okay, I'm going to go back, see if I can find my slideshow again.
Jim, while Jim is doing that, and this really is a sensibility of lots of folks at UUs, but through our time with Woodland Dunes over the last couple of decades, I think each of us has favorite places to walk and to immerse ourselves in nature. And I think what each of us can do is to support these places, not just with our presence, but with our pocketbook.
Thank you, Bonita. Okay. Takes it a while to decide that it wants to wake up in advance, I think. Well, how about this slide?
There we go.
There we go. Okay, I'm gonna, and these are all excellent points that we've been making. I'm gonna focus on the wildlife part of it and the other creatures that inhabit the earth with us and how we can make the earth and our own backyards more friendly for them. A lot of times people think in terms of natural areas as being these big refuges and places like Yellowstone Park and things like that. But actually, small scattered patches of habitat are extremely important to birds and other wildlife. And actually taken in congregation, they amount to many acres of habitat. So there are also benefits for us, though. And before I get into the wildlife, there are more and more studies that indicate that there are a lot of health benefits to spending time outdoors, and it's not just physical activity. One of my favorites is this concept in Japan that they call forest bathing, where people just go out to be in nature. And you know, many of us realize that we feel better when we're outside. We feel better when we're in a high quality natural area. They haven't figured out why that is. And there are a lot of interesting theories floating around out there. Maybe just exposure to the organisms in the soil or ions in the air or things like that. But there does seem to be some kind of connection between a feeling of well-being and being outdoors. There's also what's called biophilia, and it seems that we want to be associated with other living things. Now, it might be just the birds that you see out at your bird feeder, but how many of us have pets, dogs and cats, just for the sake of being around another kind of living organism? There's something rewarding about that. And then there are a lot of intangible quality of life kinds of things. So planners, urban planners are more and more aware of incorporating natural areas into urban landscapes. So this is my work backyard. This about 1,500 acres is the total of the woodland dunes preserves now. There are 3 altogether, but this is the main one, and we work very hard to manage it. One of the first things that we look at is what composes this habitat, the vegetation type and structure. And here's a really kind of simple habitat. A lawn is dominated by, pretty much a couple species of plants, probably not native to this area, and populated by plants and animals, other plants and animals that may or may not be native. Earthworms, believe it or not, are not native to Wisconsin. They were wiped out by the last glacier, and other earthworms were brought in by Europeans. And they can have actually a harmful effect on our forests. But then there are other things like the little moth on the upper right is the sod webworm. A lot of those around. Down on the lower left, the grass funnel web spider. Flickers are migrating through right now. They love to be on the ground, on lawns, looking for ants and other little invertebrates. Canada geese are a species that really enjoys the kind of changes we've made in the environment. They're like cows with feathers, and they like short grass, and we have really set the table for them. As we've done for the American robin, which may be the most populous bird in the continent, because we've created all this open habitat and introduced earthworms for them to eat, and what were formerly a kind of a shy forest bird has now moved out onto our lawns and is having a great time, I think. There are 2 kinds of species, basically. Some are highly adapted to specific habitats, and we call them conservative species. This is a Kirtland's warbler. There were formerly just one population in Michigan. They need jack pine stands, big tracts of jack pines, and they all go to the Bahamas for the winter. So they're really limited geographically on where they are able to survive. Jack pines in the summer and Bahamas in the winter doesn't sound too bad, unless you have a hurricane like they had last year, and they lost some habitat down there. So there is a population in Wisconsin now, and now that we realize this, we manage for those jack pine stands, and sure enough, the Kirtland's warblers find them. Around our houses, though, we have the generalists, not the conservative species, but we tend to have the ones that are very adaptable and can alter their behaviors to take advantage of the kinds of situations that we set up for them. The way things are going now, there is more and more emphasis on the generalists and the opportunists, like the raccoon and the red-winged blackbird, that often benefit from human disturbance and can utilize forms of food that we provide, either by changing the habitat or leaving food directly out. Raccoons are good at finding that. But most of the wildlife in our yards is in the soil. There are hundreds of thousands of species of living things in the soil, and they don't really even know what's all there. They find new species of bacteria in the soil every year. And you may have heard that they're looking now at various universities at finding things in the soil that might yield new antibiotics and things like that that benefit us. But soil ecosystems are really complex. But possibly the most important to our ecosystems are the insects. And we think of them more as a nuisance, but they co-inhabit these ecosystems with us. There are many different species, about 88,000 in North America, probably more than that now, it's a little dated. But they're the creatures which take the energy that plants have harvested from the sun and they move it around throughout the ecosystem. They are the mechanism by which energy flows from the sun to the plants, to insects, and all over throughout the ecosystems. Other species that don't mind living with us, these are the kinds of birds that are generalists and are happy to be around our bird feeders, as are these. In the wintertime, some of these, juncos and tree sparrows. Song sparrow on the upper left is just returning, and as I speak, there's one downstairs who's found his reflection in the window and is determined to dominate it. So he's tapping down there all the time while I'm working. We like the colorful birds, the big pileated woodpecker. I was following one on my way here this morning. They're actually doing pretty well. Some of these are migrants, some are resident birds. These birds benefit directly from us putting up shelters for them. Sometimes there are birds that, because of their color, I think we don't prefer as much, but they're certainly interesting. The starling down on the lower right is a non-native bird that we've brought over. I look forward to seeing the swallows and the swifts. We just rebuilt our chimney at the Nature Center because we've always had chimney swifts here. And when we put a new roof on, we repaired the old chimney, even though it's not used for a furnace or anything like that, which got some raised eyebrows from the mason that was working on it. So raptors, the one on the right is a sharp-shinned hawk. They specialize in other birds. That's their prey. My goodness. And then we've introduced some alien birds as well. Wanted to just touch on something really special about Wisconsin. We're a critical place in the lives of migratory birds. And if you can imagine looking at this, birds that live in Canada for the nesting season and have to get to and from there and encounter all these Great Lakes and don't necessarily want to fly over them. So they have to find places that are where they can get around them. And in some places, they're just funneled. And you can see from Sault Ste. Marie down the shores on both sides of Lake Michigan is one of those really important funnels for migratory birds. And this is just a little schematic of the overall, what they call the Mississippi flyway. But a lot of birds from Canada move over toward the Great Lakes and then have to find their way through. And where Manitowoc is in Two Rivers, we're poised right on the shoreline of Lake Michigan that they follow. And they often migrate at night and will fly up to 150 miles in a single night. But in the morning, then need a place to rest and feed. And if those places are located along the shoreline of Lake Michigan, they're doubly important to these birds. And these are some of the migrant visitors that we find. Right now, the one in the center, the little white-throated sparrow, is moving through and often seen on the ground below shrubs and things like that. They have just a wonderful call, but they move back and forth along the lakeshore, just like these other scarlet tanager and the warblers that are pictured here. And not just birds, of course. This is kind of what my backyard looks like right now, or it will soon. We don't have fawns yet, but we have a lot of deer. And there are lots of rodents and lagomorphs. Lagomorphs are the rabbits. They are able to survive just fine around people, as are the tree squirrels, most of which are in my bird feeder. Moles and shrews are really interesting. And preying on them are the various weasels. Mink are really common out here at Woodland Dunes. They like wetlands, and it's not uncommon to be out on our boardwalk and have one just about walk right up to you. And other interesting animals. If you've ever seen a possum with all of her young on her back like that, it's an amazing thing. We happened to see that last spring doing bird surveys. The canids, and then unfortunately there are some felines that are released out into the wild. They're not a native animal. Their origin is in the Middle East. They have a pretty devastating effect on native wildlife, and it's a lot better for them to live indoors. But there are also some native felines. This is a photograph that was taken a year ago on a trail cam out here. So once in a while there is a bobcat that comes along, but they're few and far between around here. And then all the pollinators. We at Woodland Dunes don't have a very good handle at all how many insects live out here, but we do manage some habitats just for them. These are native bees, bumblebees, leafcutter bee, halictid bee, really beautiful insects. Butterflies, the question mark in the upper right-hand corner is already being seen around here, either migrants or the ones that overwintered. Other insects, the solitary wasps are really interesting and not aggressive. Soldier beetles, hoverflies, and the miner bees. And these are all important pollinators. We think of honeybees, which are European, but there are a whole host of native insects that are very good pollinators. So, what is our backyard habitat? It's often a mix of lawn and shrubs and trees. It kind of is similar to the forest edge, and often a mix of native and non-native plants. You could see the difference in the quality of habitat here. A lawn, which is basically a monoculture of one kind of non-native grass, versus the potential of adding some structure and other native plants to the landscape to make it much more usable for native wildlife. Often one has to deal with invasive species first. The upper left is honeysuckle, which was planted widely years ago. The old farmstead that I live on has honeysuckle that my grandfather just loved, but it tends to just dominate the landscape. It will shade out all of the native plants, as will on the lower left is autumn olive, which was purposely brought in for wildlife cover, grew really well, promoted by the DNR until they found out that it pretty much takes over everything. And buckthorn on the upper right-hand side is another that was planted as a landscape plant, and it certainly is vigorous and green, beautiful glossy green foliage and berries, but very much outcompetes native plants. So we spend a lot of time removing non-natives, both at home and at work. I end up doing that. This is a good time of year to work on that, and what we often do is just cut them off and then treat what's left of the stump, the 6 inches or so above the ground, either with herbicide, or you can just, if you don't want to use herbicide, you can cover them with a heavy plastic bag, like a contractor bag, and that will kind of smother the plant, keep it from regrowing again. So once the non-native plants are under control, then it's good to bring in native species of plants. They provide the greatest benefit to wildlife, and they're often easy to grow. Once they get established, they don't require a lot of input. They don't like to be fertilized. They don't need a lot of water. They're just easier and more easily utilized by wildlife than the non-native plants are. A lot of them provide food for birds and other wildlife. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes there are fruits that we can see, like the chokeberries here. They are eaten by birds, especially in the fall. But it's also good to mix in nectar plants for pollinators. Having some milkweed is important nowadays. Milkweed used to be the #1 agricultural pest plant and is very susceptible to herbicides. So they made a lot of progress in getting rid of milkweed, and then found out that they were also getting rid of monarch butterflies at the same time. So it's good to have some milkweed, and there are many, many different scenarios by which native plants can be planted and incorporated into home landscapes. The native plants not only provide fruit for things like birds, but they also harbor insects that are eaten by those birds or other forms of wildlife. The non-native plants are not populated by nearly as many insects as native plants are. There have been some interesting studies about that, where they've taken sections of branches and looked for every little caterpillar on them, and found that native plants had many times more insects on them than the non-native plants. And that's why things like migratory birds look to those native plants when they're migrating, especially in the spring. Incorporating some water, even just a simple little water feature, is great for wildlife. Just want to make sure that the edges aren't sloping so much that the animals are injured. Cover, Robert brought this up a little while ago. It's important to incorporate some plants that provide cover, have dense foliage. It's a good idea to plant things that deer don't like. We have kind of created an imbalance right now where there are so many deer that it's very difficult to plant things like white cedar that used to be dominant around here because the deer will just eat off the young ones. So, but there are alternatives to that. The oaks are probably the most beneficial native trees that one can plant, not only for the acorns that they produce that are used by wildlife, but also those insects. Oaks have been studied quite a bit. It's been found that some species of oak will harbor 500 different species of native insects that birds eat. So when those warblers are migrating through in the springtime, they look first to trees like oaks, where they know they're going to find a lot to eat as far as insects. Mulberries are a really good wildlife tree. They're not so good for your neighbors if you plant them right on the property line, because they will make well, they'll stain everything. But we have a big old mulberry tree that was planted by the farm family that founded our headquarters farm here, and it's like a living bird feeder for 2 months of the year. Cedar waxwings and all kinds of things are in there eating all the time. Red cedars, again, cedar waxwings take their name from the red cedar. It's a nice dense foliage plant. Produces berries that some birds will eat, and deer do not like it at all. They leave red cedar alone. So that's one that one could plant even if there are a lot of deer around. Related to that is a common juniper. This is one that my grandfather planted. And I just wanted to illustrate here what happens in the winter. It kind of lays low to the ground, but creates hollows and gets covered by snow, and it's quite sheltered and significantly warmer in there than it is in the outside world. And that's a magnet for birds, especially at night. Is another one that deer do not like, but is a native conifer. So you see it out in the landscape. There are a few at woodland dunes, but you see more of them up north, but a very beneficial plant. Viburnums are wonderful. There are many different varieties. Here I have a nannyberry up on the upper left. You can see the sprays of flowers that they get that are used by pollinators when it's in season. And later on, they get berries. Down on the lower left is what they call commonly the blue muffin viburnum. It's actually a southern arrowwood. But those berries don't last very long. The birds find them right away. And high bush cranberry is the one on the right. Those tend to hang on there a bit longer. I think they're a little sour. The birds don't like them as much, but they use them later on in late winter and early spring when other food sources are kind of scarce. So. Ninebark is on the left. That's doesn't necessarily produce fruit. It has kind of dry little seeds, but you can see it produces a lot of flowers that pollinators use, and it's nice dense foliage again for the birds to go and shelter in. Chokeberry is one that produces a lot of berries in late summer. Serviceberry is a wonderful native tree that's found in forests all around here. The fruit is very edible to people as well as wildlife, and often doesn't last very long. I get very few serviceberries or juneberries because the birds have beaten me to it already. Hawthorns are good, and fortunately there are varieties that don't have thorns on them now that are a little more friendly to plant around our backyard landscapes. But those little hawthorns that persist over the winter end up being food for robins and early migrants in the spring, as are the fruits of the crab apples. Flowering crab trees, the pollinators use, and then later on birds use them. And specifically for pollinators, you know, there's often little patches of our yard that could be planted in something easy to grow that benefits those native bees and butterflies. Goldenrod is one that is very beneficial, can be a little aggressive, goldenrod can, but one can always just pull it and keep it under control. Liatris is the purple one, and that's one that's extremely popular with butterflies. There are many different kinds of milkweeds. The common milkweed is on the right. That's the one we're used to seeing, but butterfly weed is a beautiful orange plant, and world milkweed is a smaller white-flowered plant that grows in just horrible soil conditions, really likes sand and gravel, and not a lot of care, and water or anything like that. And then aesthetically on the lavender side, bergamot is a mint, and the mints are, you know, strong smelling and strong flavored. Bergamot was, that's where you get Earl Grey tea from. The deer don't like that one. They leave that alone. Produces a lot of flowers that pollinators like. And Joe Pyeweed is one that grows in kind of wet waste spaces, but very popular with butterflies. Evening primrose is very easy to grow. Ironweed is one. We were surprised out here at how well it grew when it got a little care. If we controlled the weeds around it, suddenly it was like it was released in the butterfly garden. It was like 8 feet tall or something like that. So the early bloomers coming up, the mountain mint on the upper left is one that pollinators like when they're just starting their colonies in the early summer. Coreopsis and penstemon are others that bloom right away in early June, as do the catkins of the willow trees, the pussy willows. Those are important for bumblebees, as are other mints. The white one on the lower right is Culver's root, and it's a very delicate flower, but bumblebees really enjoy it. And as the season goes on, we start to see asters, and there are many different species of aster that we can plant in our yards. My favorite is the New England aster, the nice purple ones that emerge in September. But there are a lot of different other asters, and as there are sunflowers. Coneflowers are closely related to the sunflowers. The purple coneflower is beautiful. It's not quite native to this part of Wisconsin, but it's pretty close. And it actually grows to the south, and I think as our climate unfortunately warms, it's probably going to do better and better around here. The blazing stars, or liatris, are really interesting plants, and again, very beneficial to pollinators. So what we want to do as we're trying to incorporate native plants into our yards, we want to pay attention to soil conditions, match those up with the requirements of the plants as well as we can. Make sure that we give them a lot of room when we plant them. But after the first year, it's not really necessary to fuss over them too much. Only precaution is if you're planting trees, you want to stay away from power lines. They run into a lot of problems with that. And the power company will come and trim them, but don't necessarily cut them down, and you end up with some really malformed trees as a result. For the native grasses and wildflowers, a lot of people like to try to plant prairies or little prairie patches. It's good to prepare the site to limit competition from non-native plants the year before you want to plant. So you can either remove the sod or smother the area with plastic, black plastic, and cultivate it several times as farmers did in the old days, just to disrupt those weed seedlings, or you can use herbicide. But please be careful with that, that it's used properly. The seed, often it's good to sow in either early spring or late fall, and we really like planting prairie seed in fall. That's the time of year when those seeds are naturally produced by the plants and fall to the soil, and they benefit from going through the cold cycle over the winter. And as a result, more of the seeds germinate in the spring. Prairies or native grasslands take some patience, often 3 or 4 years to mature. And it's good to not plant too densely. Leave some spaces between plants because believe it or not, a lot of the bees nest in the soil. They'll nest in burrows. Bumblebees, most of the bumblebees will nest that way. And they like some open, bare soil to dig into and start their colonies. There are a lot of sources of seedlings, either mail order or some local or around here. And of course, garden centers. Sometimes it's difficult to find native species under that circumstance. And native wildflowers, especially wild plants or seed, there are a lot of different sources, both Prairie Moon and Prairie Nursery. Stone Silo is a wonderful native plant nursery in De Pere. It's not a long drive. And Justin up there has some wonderful plants that were raised in our climate here. Please don't take wildflowers from public lands. That's not legal. And in the Fox River Valley, there is a chapter of the Wild Ones, native landscapers, and what they do is keep an eye out for areas that are going to be disturbed by development, and they will go in and rescue the native plants and take them other places and plant them. So for wildlife in our yard, you know, we're thinking food, water, shelter, native plants. And I don't know, did I say that like 100 times now? Native plants are really important. And it's good to have variation in the structure, the height of plants, and the density of plants in your yard, and having some flowers for pollinators. So putting it all together, hopefully you end up with something that's really interesting. Now I'm not sure, this one might raise some objections from neighbors, but it certainly looks like a wildlife friendly place. A lot of different things you can do, and you can't really do anything wrong if you're incorporating native plants. This is a free online guide to making one's backyard more bird friendly. There are a number of others. National Wildlife Federation has a great backyard program. More and more resources devoted to this kind of thing. So that's what I have for you today, and hopefully we can all keep this in mind as we're working in our backyards and share what we have with the wildlife that lives around us. So Thanks very much for having me today.
Thank you so much, Jim.
Stop the share, Jim.
Got it.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jim. I learned so much, and it was a visual treat looking at those gorgeous pictures. Just a treat. I'm going to say if people have questions, because we're a little bit over our time, I'm going to ask you to go to nature@woodlanddunes.org, and Jim will be able to respond to you. Does that sound okay, Jim?
That sounds great.
Wonderful. And we appreciate you, like I said, it was fabulous. Jim Hallahan, did you have a comment about donations?
Thank you. Yes. The Lakeshore Unitarian Universalist Fellowship is supported by pledges of members and donations from friends. Just wanted to remind people that pledge on a monthly basis to either make your pledge online at the website or mail your pledge into the to the fellowship. And for those of you who are friends of our fellowship, if you're so moved, we welcome contributions, and you can make those on the donation button on the website. And we thank all of you for all of your both volunteer and for your financial support.
I'd also like to add something. We are getting our annual canvas out just as we speak. Pretty much tomorrow, I think we'll be mailing out all the letters. This is a month late, but just so you know, you'll be getting information in the mail. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. And at this point, we'll go on to our closing words. Our closing song. Blue Boat Home, one of our favorites. It's in our teal book, and it's by Peter Mayer.
Oh, wait a minute.
Every nation come. Below me, I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean. Still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the lights of the heavens in our beautiful blue boat home. to the waves upholding me. Hail the great winds urging me on. Read the infinite sea before me. Sing the sky my sailor's song. I was born upon the fathoms. Never harbor or port have I known. Wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat. Home. Blue boat.
Our closing words today are by May Sarton. Help us to be the always hopeful gardeners of the spirit who know that without darkness, nothing comes to birth, as without light, nothing flowers.
Shalom, Chaverim, Shalom, Chaverim, Shalom, Shalom. Lehitraot, Lehitraot, Shalom, Goodbye, my friends, be safe, my friends, have peace, till we meet again, till we meet again, have peace, have peace. Goodbye, my friends, be safe, my friends, you're safe, have peace, till we meet again, till we meet again, till we meet again, have peace, have peace. Shalom, Chaverim, Shalom, Chaverim, Shalom, Shalom,
That concludes our service today.